Thank you, Christy, and thanks, a big thanks to the entire CSI team. This has been a great set of panels, and I'm very thankful to have been asked to moderate this great panel on a very timely topic. I think we're going to dive right into it because I know we are pressed for time, and I want to make sure we get all the questions into our panelists. But I just to frame the discussion, I think, unfortunately, this debate around digital trade and by extension services trade, unfortunately, has devolved, I think, into a debate around the power of big tech. And we all know that services are absolutely transformational for SMEs, for first-time exporters. And I think we need to do a better job of changing this discussion and underscoring what a powerful tool digital services are across all industry sectors and across companies of all sizes. So I hope we can get into that during this panel. Let me start. Hera, as I said, there are clearly large segments of our economy that rely on digital services, on digital trade. But what is Mastercard doing as a financial services company, but in effect, you're a digital company, to drive financial inclusion for these SMEs so that they can compete and operate globally?
Sure, thanks, Michael. Thank you to CSI for hosting this wonderful annual event. So for Mastercard, as you know, we're a global payments and payments and technology company, payments company. And so we have, a multi-pronged approach. So what we do is we have kind of our general kind of corporate action and kind of corporate business lines, right? So we have open banking, we have fintech companies, we have cyber companies. And so we kind of are doing that corporate stuff with our business lines. And part of that is also our robust SME ecosystem. We have a global SME ecosystem. We're able to work with the different entrepreneurs of, who own businesses of varying sizes, oftentimes very small businesses, micro businesses, and really work with them and tailor solutions to their needs. And then the last thing is our philanthropic arm. The Mastercard Impact Fund has invested in myriad programs. We have wonderful STEM programs. Girls for Tech is the world's largest STEM program. It's a Mastercard program. It's kind of one of our flagship programs. And just to kind of bring it all together, we do lay out our goals and our metrics, and we want to make sure we meet them. And some of the goals that we've laid out are connecting 1 billion people to the digital economy by 2025, connecting 50 million micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to the digital economy also through the end of 2025, providing 25 million women entrepreneurs with solutions that can help grow their businesses by 2025, and register 30 million users on the Community Pass platform by 2027, which is another one of our programs to reach small and micro enterprises.
Great. Okay. Nick, Mr. Big Tech. If Senator Elizabeth Warren hauled you before Congress,
don't give her ideas,
and you had to explain what Google is doing, what kind of solutions you are creating and providing to SMEs, how would you respond?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's great to be here today. I would say, it is really important to think about this from the vantage point of a startup or a small business. If you're thinking about digital trade purely from the perspective of what benefits or harms big tech companies, frankly, there's a lot of new regulations around the world, and a lot of our companies are pretty equipped to deal with those regulations. We have large compliance teams, large legal teams. We have resources to bring to bear to sort of address the concerns that regulators have in many markets, and we're very much trying to be a compliance-oriented company in many markets around the world. But if you're a smaller company, if you're an SMB, or if you're a startup, then you don't have those same kinds of resources. You need some assurance that as you do business across borders, that there's be some degree of interoperability, and if not full harmonization, at least predictability around sort of the regulatory ecosystem in these markets. And I think this is where trade can play a very positive role, which is setting those kind of baseline norms, not just anti-regulatory kinds of norms, but also positive regulatory norms to show different governments and different stakeholders what needs to be in place for a small business or a startup to succeed in that kind of market. So I think it's really important to think about how do you build rules that enable every small business, every startup to be able to become an exporter from day one. I think this was actually easier 10 years ago. There's a little bit less regulatory complexity around the world and a little and just a more of a path to export-driven growth for many smaller companies. This has gotten a lot harder over the last few years for a variety of both geopolitical and other factors. And there's been sort of an understandable effort to figure out better strategies on tech regulation around the world. But I think it's important to have some degree of consistency and interoperability between those regulations. That's what makes it possible for a startup to be, if not global from day one, at least an exporter from day one. I think it's really important from a competitive standpoint. If your goal is to ultimately sort of dethrone the bigger tech players, you want there to be sort of rules in place that allow smaller companies to scale up quickly and to become global players fairly quickly too. So important to think about these things, not just from the perspective of the large tech companies, but from the smaller SME perspective as well. And we're doing a lot, obviously, to help those small businesses succeed. But I think having a policy environment that helps them succeed is just as important.
Yeah, we need to get that message out there, unfortunately, but that's great to know. Ryan, maybe we can pivot a little bit. You know, as a representative of the Department of Commerce, one of the key functions of Commerce is to help SMEs and first-time exporters. So I specifically wanted to ask you what the International Trade Administration is doing to promote and equip SMEs with the digital tools that they need to compete overseas.
Sure, great. I appreciate being here. Thank you to CSI for having me. You heard earlier from Assistant Secretary Venkatraman, who is the Assistant Secretary for Global Markets at the International Trade Administration, emphasize the importance of digital services within ITA as one of our priorities, but also inclusion, and particularly inclusion in the digital economy, is one of the central parts of the mission to enhance American competitiveness and grow exports. So we're definitely focused on this, and we also are trying to take a look at what digital tools, of course, our SMEs need in order to take advantage of the digital economy. And so there was a report out from the Small Business Administration last year that talked about SMEs' use and access to digital tools, and it identified some challenges that I think connect really directly to what Commerce is doing in order to close the digital divide. And so those were on infrastructure or access to the internet, digital literacy, and technology knowledge. And so within the Department of Commerce, and particularly the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, they're tackling those first two issues. And so they're implementing the $42 billion Broadband Equity Access and Development Program, which is expanding high-speed internet across the United States. And it's important to note that 1 in 5 Americans still do not have access to high-speed internet. And when you layer affordability on top of that, there's also additional challenges there. And so NTIA also has its state digital equity program, which is funding $1.5 billion to promote affordability within broadband and also to address digital literacy. Within, there's another grant program that I think is important too, and this is to get beyond just simply focusing on SMEs, but also what we're doing for minority businesses. And so there's a grant program where they're providing funding to historically Black colleges and universities in order to close that digital divide and address digital training and skills. And so I think that's important to note. Within the International Trade Administration, we're focused on that technology knowledge. And so we have a program called the E-commerce Innovation Lab. And what that does is help our SMEs who are trying to export to understand what they can do around e-commerce platforms, but also they're helping train them on search engine optimization and website optimization. The thing, though, that I think is important from ITA's perspective too is this idea of inclusion. And so we have a program that we call the Global Diversity Export Initiative, which is targeting minority-owned businesses and bringing those export tools to them to help address the unique challenges that they have. And we do this through our network of U.S. export assistance centers that we have in 100 cities throughout the United States.
Great. Brian, first of all, I have to assume that a lot of your members are SMEs.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you speak to your members, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that they see across the markets that they're trying to compete in? And, can you tell us a little bit about how the sort of the app ecosystem, why digital inclusion is so important for that ecosystem?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much for having me here. Just as maybe a level set, just where people know where I'm coming from. Not-for-profit trade association, ACT, the App Association, representing MSMEs that are operating in the United States and outside the United States across a wide range of consumer and enterprise verticals. These issues have become a lot more urgent for our members of late. I do agree. And I would also agree with, I think, something you initially threw out, that the motivation behind a lot of, especially the domestic regulatory activity abroad, is based in addressing household name, larger companies with little consideration given to the innovation that the MSME component of the industry is providing all the time. I think as a theme, and this is like a challenge, I think we run into almost like a tension that exists on like the part of regulator X abroad, in that they want to they want to empower their own digital MSME community, and at the same time they also want, at least they say it usually, they would also like to ensure availability to services and greater competition that will lower prices. It doesn't always translate, unfortunately, and where there's, the specific challenges that we most often hear about practically, where a company will say, I'm not even going to try, to go into that market. Usually we'll trace back to data localization requirements, the potential of custom duty, or I'll throw in digital service taxes with that, intellectual property rights, and just being able to have certainty that you can protect those rights, that you can avoid, the escrowing or inspection of proprietary source code as a condition of market access. And probably one that's more emerging, that is really most, it inevitably is coming up with AI, is these what I call misapplied applications of antitrust and consumer protection laws to emerging nascent markets based on edge use cases and hypotheticals. All these things kind of combine to present a number of challenges. So there, I think the effort, ultimately, I think, the build once, sell anywhere is a dynamic that has been enabled by, you could call the traditional digital trade policy of the United States, for sure, and through other, things like the moratorium on e-commerce. And these companies that I'm representing are relying on the programs of larger companies, the partnership they would have, as well as the really the great efforts of our colleagues at the USG. So we're at the end of the day asking that we don't try and fix something that isn't broken, because the growth is a hockey stick right now.
It's a very good point. So let's pivot for a sec, because we've talked a lot about AI today. And, AI is now being embedded across all industry sectors. But I guess the big question is, how do we ensure that the benefits of AI don't just accrue to the Fortune 500 companies? How does it percolate to the SMEs, to the startups? So would love to hear the panelists' ideas on that. Hera, let me start with you.
Thanks for the question, Michael. I would say for us, AI and cyber are really intertwined. Mastercard processes per day 1.2 billion with the B transactions. It's a lot of transactions. And so we have to have some sort of systems to track them, safeguards to make sure that we prevent fraud. And we have great metrics. We tracked our cyber and AI capabilities. And over a period of 12 months, we were able to prevent $20 billion in fraud. And that $20 billion isn't lining the pocket of one company or one person. It's really about protecting consumers, keeping costs low, making sure that, consumers or businesses aren't on the hook for fraudulent transactions, making sure people's data is secure. So for us, it's a very intertwined system. We have rules of governance. I know IBM also has great rules of governance as well. IBM alum, so we'll do the little pitch. But that's something very important to us. So as we sort of have our AI evolve, we have a lot of safeguards in place. We have a lot of internal reviews. And so we have a lot of great kind of case studies on that. But for us, it's really about protecting the consumer, making sure we reduce fragmentation, making sure that the transaction is as seamless as possible for the entrepreneur, for the customer, for whoever it is, and just ensuring that, it's kind of people can go about their daily lives and do what they want to do. And AI is an augmenter.
Nick, maybe.
Yeah, it's a big moment, and it's a really been really pleased to see the progress that many governments have made on AI governance. The U.S. has been a real leader here, going back to the NIST framework around risk management of AI, and up through the recent White House commitments around AI, and now through the executive order. There's been a really sort of, I think, comprehensive and very sort of far-sighted a forward-looking a path that the U.S. has taken to thinking about how do you both govern AI and how do you also unlock innovation and growth potential from AI. Now, for this to actually redound to the benefit of all companies, I think it's important to have a pretty holistic strategy around how you can really ensure that workers who are outside of the typical tech sectors are also the ones benefiting from AI. We've seen, I think, some good efforts in the EO, actually. I think the USAID and state are tasked to sort of develop sort of a global playbook on addressing AI and workforce issues, which I think is a good step towards figuring out this kind of strategy. Department of Labor is also engaged in a pretty smart process right now to understand where AI is likely to be disruptive to different industries, and ensuring that there is smart strategies in place to address those kinds of disruptions. I think, for AI to have the kind of economic benefit that many think it will have, it really can't just be sort of the provenance of sort of the large tech companies and large companies. It has to be sort of spread across a variety of sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, energy, other parts of the economy that typically haven't been sort of the early adopters of technology, but that are major employers and major parts of the U.S. economy. And I think thinking about this in a global context and a development context is also quite important, which is why the state and USAID work is so important there as well. So I think it's just important to have a strategy that kind of straddles the line between policy, between investment and infrastructure, between skilling and education, and having a sort of a broad approach to ensuring these things are universally accessible, and that you can ensure that every sector has some ability to benefit, and every small business has some ability to benefit from AI. So I think really positive steps taken so far, and we saw this actually in the G7 statement last week as well, and a smart effort from a number of different countries to align around a forward-looking agenda here.
Great. Let me jump to Brian, because Ryan, I'm going to come back to you to talk about what Commerce is doing to implement the EO. But Brian, maybe I can jump to you about this question about AI and how this is going to support the kind of SMEs that you guys represent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's however one defines it, right? However one defines AI. A lot of our members are building on, foundational models and tools offered by some larger companies, again, with the partnership with others, and creating their own AI tools. And they've been doing it for a while. I don't know if it got labeled as as AI, several years ago, but I think I agree with what you were just saying, Nick, as far as the USG's approach, which does, in my humble opinion, stand in contrast to some other major jurisdictions like the European Union. A risk-based, scalable framework that allows for mitigating steps to be taken that scale to the harm presented, like that's put forward in the NIST AI risk management framework. And I think that principle underlies the exercise that basically every agency in the federal government is going through right now per the executive order, where they're looking at their existing laws and seeing how they can apply. The fact that someone's using AI, however you define it, does that really warrant a brand new set of regulations on top of the existing technology agnostic regulations that very often exist for consumer protection, protecting competition, et cetera? Most times, no, I would think, but that's a good model, I think. The contrast that I mentioned with the European Union is, you know, I mean, there is credit to the AI Act. There is some scaling there, but they're still banning outright use cases. And we will probably wake up tomorrow and find some new innovative niche use case that would conflict with that. And, you know, and you have to update their law so that it's allowed, you know, that sort of a thing, that those kind of static bans are troubling. And that's the sort of thing that for our members is vexing to them. So, you know, I think it does kind of go back to for me, the reinforcing, you know, and establishing harms that are systemic. And there are some for AI. There's no denying that. You're not going to find anyone up here denying that there aren't some existing right now, but establishing them and then addressing them rather than basing them on hypotheticals or one-off edge use cases, I think is the principle that would ensure you know, the success for smaller businesses. Any kind of regulation put in place that would lock in existing kings of the mountain, if you will, would make the moat wider for someone to come in new and innovate. So that's a concern.
Okay, then Ryan, let's close out on this question. Obviously, we have the AI executive order. Would love to hear what ITA is doing to implement that order, and particularly thinking about how AI can help when you are working with SMEs and first-time exporters. What's your advice is to them?
Yeah, sure. So I feel that informative is this report that was released by the Bipartisan Policy Center earlier this year that focused in on how small businesses are navigating through the AI frontier. And they noted through a survey that the businesses are reporting that they expect AI will help them to cut costs, increase profits, improve productivity, compete for market share, and better serve customers and employees. They also said a majority of those surveyed small businesses are exploring AI tools, some 57%. So around AI adoption, it's encouraging that small companies seem to be helping drive forward the adoption of AI here in the United States. But they did note some challenges, of course, which are around cost. I think that's probably the number one concern that they have in adopting AI tools, and other challenges around data privacy, lack of digital literacy, lack of knowledge about which technology to use, et cetera. One of the things, though, that they noted and recommended for the government to help and support is, of course, lowering costs. I think that's doesn't need to be said, but they also emphasized the idea around codifying responsible AI and how small businesses really want the government to focus in on this and develop that AI governance and frameworks. And so that ties directly to what the International Trade Administration is doing to support the executive order on AI. My team and across ITA, we work very closely with our colleagues at NIST and NTIA and USPTO and BIS to amplify the work that they're doing directly with the executive order. And my team is leveraging our international network through our trade specialists who are in U.S. embassies around the world to speak with governments around AI cooperation and assure that hopefully ensure alignment with our AI governance approaches. Core to our work, though, of course, is promoting U.S. AI technology to be the best-in-class solutions to the challenges that these various economies are facing. But what we're doing directly with these governments is sharing best practices and aligning regulatory approaches specifically on transparency, interoperability, and risk management. As many of you noted, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework is one of the main topics that comes up when we're working with foreign governments, and so we're making sure that we're talking about that continually. The thing though that to bring it back to SMEs and particularly minority-owned businesses is that we want them to be at the table. We want their viewpoints to be heard when policy regulation is being developed. And what we're doing is trying to bring their voices into the policy discussions that we have with foreign governments. And so we organize roundtables and whatnot so that their views are directly heard. But I think this really ties back to overall how governments and then small, medium-sized companies are cooperating together, or should cooperate together in order to get AI governance right.
Great. So we only have a few minutes left. So we sort of touched upon this already, but thinking about, I want to kind of do a lightning round here. We have a lot of government officials in the room. So my first question is to each of you is, what do we, if you were an SME, what are the key barriers out there that are inhibiting them from finding new opportunities? We talked about source code and source code disclosure, algorithmic disclosure requirements. What other barriers do you see as proliferating that are particularly harmful to SMEs?
I mean, yeah, I would say I'm sort of touching on it again, but definitely the fragmentation issue. And so there are a lot of causes, right? At the end of the day, you want to have kind of interoperable regimes. You want to make sure there are rules of the road, they're clear, they're relatively straightforward to follow, ideally very easy to follow. And you want to make sure that, business owners should, who want to do business should be able to do business. It really comes down to that. So I think, any sort of, any regulations or any action or anything that really fragments the economy and sort of increases friction can definitely be problematic. And I think the last thing I'll say is kind of the digital revolution has been here, will continue to accelerate. And so, I think facing it head on and embracing it and figuring out ways to make sure it works for, consumers and workers and business owners of all sizes is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, not too much new to add. I think it is really important to assess these empirically, though, which is like do surveys, like bring in small businesses as you all have done, sort of understand what they're facing. It's one thing to say, from on high, what we think the barriers faced by small businesses are, but actually doing the work and bringing them together and hearing from roundtables. It's like, our current sort of trade advisory council system and other parts of it aren't really set up that well to reflect the voices of actual small businesses. So I think finding ways to bring them into the policymaking process to go out there into the country too, because obviously, the average small business does not have a DC representative who's able to sort of effectively convey their views. So going out there, doing road shows, understanding what they're facing, certainly from a digital perspective, I think you'll hear from a lot of them that it is just very hard to think about even becoming an exporter unless you have access to cloud services, unless you have access to platforms that allow you to serve those global markets. So ensuring that there are availability of those basic products, both in the US and in the foreign markets where the SME wants to do business is really important. But I would also just really think about bringing them into the dialogue more clearly and thinking about how to represent those workers within the trade making process. That's
a great point. Ryan, perhaps I'll just ask you what you may be hearing from your clients, right, when they come in to talk to Commerce. Do they ever raise some of these issues?
Well, earlier we heard a lot about data flows.
Yeah.
And we recognize the importance of data flows within the digital economy. Data underpins everything. My office works very closely with a sister office that focuses on data privacy and data policy. And I think one of the successes that we have been able to implement that has helped facilitate the flow of information is the EU-US data privacy framework, which of course is the mechanism for US companies to be able to bring information over from Europe. And we do that in a way that also protects individual rights and data. So I think that's a good success that helps to address some of the barriers. And we also, I think, that was mentioned earlier by our Assistant Secretary, is the global cross-border privacy rules, which we're trying to expand so that we have increased interoperability between the different data privacy regimes throughout different economies.
Okay. 1 minute, so we.
1
we will
minute,
end.
okay. No, thank you. Just to build on all that, because I do agree with everything that I just heard from my fellow panelists there. But yeah, you know, the customs duties, the fractured or patchwork quilt for compliance. One I didn't mention, but I think has come up here a bunch of times on other panels as well. Privacy and cybersecurity rules kind of feed into that fracturing, that undermine the ability to use, you know, technical protection mechanisms that companies like our members need to, you know, gain and maintain consumer trust or end user trust. You know, I think something else that we're trying to emphasize this, and there's got to, maybe it just takes more partnership from all of us in making the point that you know, that these pro-digital trade policies are inclusive and are an incredible means of empowerment, not just for US startups, the ones that we know, but for ones in developing countries as well, that would have basically no access whatsoever to the global digital economy were it not for some of the existing constructs that are facilitated by, for example, the frameworks that Ryan was just mentioned. So just violently agreeing here.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's a good place to end it. So please join me in thanking the panelists.